Welcome to Show Your Priors. He's Michael Nichols. And I'm Jason Thompson. A prior is the belief you bring before the argument starts. I'm just rolling with it now. Each week we show our priors, look at the evidence, and update as necessary. On tonight's show, the White House completely reverses its stance on AI regulation. We'll dig into that one. Then we've got an insightful interview with strategist and innovator Dan Toma. You're not going to want to miss that one. But first, let's get into the headlines. A study published this week in Science, a prestigious scientific journal, found that an AI model correctly identified the diagnosis of 67% of real emergency room cases at a Boston hospital, compared to 55 and 50% for two attending physicians. The researchers used 76 actual patient records with zero modifications, and no AI company funded this work. Independent, in other words. The researchers stopped well short of recommending clinical deployment, instead calling for formal trials. Michael, if AI is already outperforming doctors in peer-reviewed studies using real patients and real records, what is the actual argument for not at least putting it in the room as a second opinion?
This is a very interesting one, right? Because one of my great hopes with AI, and I think OpenAI has taken this approach, is that medicine is ripe for AI to come in and improve diagnoses. Now, can it improve outcomes? That's where everybody's going to, right? And I think one of the interesting things here, because my wife is a doctor, is that ER doctors, I don't know if you know anything about it, but they're always on call. They're always tired, right? And if you're always on call and you're always tired, can you keep up with the latest literature? I think you know where I'm going. AI can. So whenever you're looking at any particular patient, AI can potentially look at the DNA of that particular patient, measure it against all other outcomes that have ever existed, measure it against all the literature. Can a doctor do that on the fly, tired, under pressure? That's the question. Now, I know a lot of people will say, I would never trust AI with my heart. But on the other side, if it keeps advancing at this pace, you might have a special heart defect that a regular ER doctor has never heard of. So think of AI as like the special Dr. House, right? Like
Right.
this AI is House on fire and has the whole world's knowledge at its fingertips. And then you can think of the possibilities. I'm not saying it's there yet. The researchers obviously hedged, but that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
That points to a direction maybe the LLMs are not. It points to a direction maybe social media and AI, it's just simply not pointing to, where people are a little bit skeptical about data and privacy, etc. But you know where my mind went with this is education. Maybe the problem is that these doctors haven't seen enough volume to get to the proper diagnoses. Like an analogy, in strategy and consulting, and innovation or VC, venture capital, you get better over time at pattern matching because you just seen many more patterns. You start to pattern match based on volume. That can be dangerous, but it also gives you a quick heuristic to say, this is what I think I'm seeing. But AI has a special advantage over the VC and the consultant. It can dig deeper into the world's knowledge on the fly. I can't do that as a VC. I can only look at the 400 examples I've seen in corporate and beyond, but I can't look at the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of examples at the same time. So that's very powerful if you can harness it in the right way. And what it tells me is the threat may not be to the ER room. It may actually help the ER room. The threat might actually be to medical education. Are we preparing doctors in the right way? That might be the ideal place to place AI. That's my point.
a couple interesting points on this study that I found. The AI scored exceptionally even better on management reasoning, which is what comes after initial diagnosis. That's the tests that are ordered, antibiotics that are ordered, that type of thing. The next steps. It did very well. It did 89% compared to 34% for doctors using Google level tech, not AI. So that was interesting. But there were some counterpoints here. The test didn't allow the humans. The humans were working off the files just like the AI was. Now, in real world situations, humans are in the room with the patients. They can see things like skin discoloration, overall temperament, pain, that type of thing. And secondly, these were internal medicine attending physicians, very talented and skilled people, but not emergency, or I said technicians, physicians, but not emergency physicians. So they weren't actually trained in emergency.
Which are the highest paid. They're the highest paid for a good reason.
Yeah. I mean, that's very high stress and very high intensity, and I'm sure a bunch of training.
It's kind of like professional. It's kind of like professional athletes,
Yeah.
right? So the people that make it into the ER and thrive are like the highest of the highest level in professional athletics. If you make it to the ER and you're high paid, you're LeBron James of medicine. Just think of it that way.
I always thought
And
of it as like that sounds like a terrible job, like that you must not pay very well. Like the people aren't.
No. I think if you look across most high paying jobs, they carry high risk, right? And ER is one of those. You can look it up on the fly. And you could probably look it up by organ. Brain surgeons, heart surgeons are going to be at the top.
Yeah, they are.
And why? Because it's high risk on the fly. Now, they don't have an arena watching them, so yeah, they're not paid properly like LeBron James. But yeah, I think the analogy holds that the skills you need at that level are so high, you're getting paid a lot, so there's a lot of competition to come in there. So the question is, and this is the position I would always like to take with AI, how can AI help them? Under stress, tired, right? Operating on essential organs in the human body.
Yeah.
That's the way I think you should think about the best ways to deploy AI, right?
Yeah. Well, I absolutely think it needs to be adopted in many ways in medicine, especially when it comes to understanding DNA, RNA, genetic codes, stuff that can fix and cure diseases or conditions. That type of stuff is going to do just fantastic well, just because the amount of data is too big for humans. Okay, let's turn now to Apple. They're expected to announce at its developer conference next month that the next version of iOS 27, I believe, will allow users to choose which AI model powers Siri and other system-wide features. With Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT all in the running. This is a significant departure for Apple, which has built its entire competitive advantage on keeping its ecosystem closed and controlled, even down to the charge ports. Apple has made it clear it will not be responsible for those third-party models, what they say or do. Michael, is it a brilliant strategic play, or is it a sign that Apple is falling behind in a way that actually matters?
So we talked about this on a previous episode, and some commenters, listeners disagreed with us. And the point that we were making was Apple owns the channel.
Yeah.
Apple owns the customer. And the criticism we got was Apple should be actually developing its own AI. And we said, but why? Why should it do that if it owns the customer? Why not treat the foundation labs, the different models, as suppliers? Right? You need our customers. We don't need to spend capital on developing AI. You're just a supplier for us with the different models, be it Gemini, Anthropic with Claude, or OpenAI, or the open models. That's just smart. Why is that smart? That's smart because dual sourcing, triple sourcing, quadruple sourcing suppliers does what? It lowers the price of the supply because you have to compete for my customers. That's a very smart strategic approach. And I think there are already signs We talked last week about Elon, the suit against Sam Altman, and then how Microsoft was playing a role in that. And I think it's very clear Microsoft is going to make a similar move. Why? Because being beholden to one foundation lab is a risk. If it were winner take all, it makes sense to ally yourself with the winner take all like OpenAI. It looked like that very early. But now, Anthropic's coming, rushing at the gates, right? Entering enterprise at unprecedented rates, winning enterprise customers. Why would you hold yourself with just one model? Why? Why be dedicated to one model? You could use all of them. And I told you, like our model, where we're trying to enter enterprise for better strategic reasoning, we use Claude, but we run into customers all the time who only use one of the other models. And I think this is just logical that if you're sitting where you own the channels, just make it triple, quadruple open source, right? Where you have multiple suppliers competing for your customers, and then you hold pricing power in the end. You
Yeah.
have leverage over you hold buyer power, if you use Michael Porter's old language, over those suppliers. So I think it makes a hell of a lot of sense what they're doing. And the question would be, will Microsoft follow suit? Probably. It it makes sense strategically to do so. And I don't think it contradicts Apple's model. Apple has always not been responsible for third-party dev applications, right? I mean, this is their model. They open it up to you on the App Store, and then it's your responsibility to meet their standards. So I don't think it's a contradiction at all.
You kind of alluded to this, but even though Apple isn't responsible for what these models will say or do, they are responsible for probably some percentage of those AI subscriptions that are bought through the App Store go back to Apple. So that's kind of the race right now in AI. It's not necessarily to get to AGI exactly. It is to become the thing that is the next App Store. Because if you control the App Store, you get a piece of everybody's pie. It's huge. It's a big deal. So I don't know. That was very interesting there. There's also an agreement with Gemini or with Google right now where Gemini will power native Siri features, meaning some users may be routed to Gemini even without selecting it. And then we also don't know if these models will have as much access to your personal information on the phone like Apple Intelligence does. I'm not an Apple user, so I don't know exactly that, but I assume it can access your calendar and your contacts, that type of thing. So I don't know. It's unclear.
If you allow it, yeah.
Yeah, it's unclear if it'll have that function. All right, let's move forward to Amazon, who announced this week it's opening its entire logistics operation, including freight, fulfillment, distribution, and last mile delivery to any business in the country. UPS dropped 10% and FedEx dropped 9% on this news. Amazon's VP compared this launch directly to the founding of AWS, which turned internal cloud infrastructure into a business worth more than $100 billion a year. Amazon has now run this exact playbook twice: build internal capability, weaponize it as a product, and then crater an existing industry. Mike, at what point does every large company have to start asking whether it's core operations or Amazon's next product or not?
I think this is a very logical move. I go very deeply into this in my book, where I talk about when you want to do business model innovation and you want to go away from your core business, the way that you would do that, we talked about that with Scott Newton about why Kodak failed and Fujifilm thrived. It was because Fujifilm went to the heart of their capabilities, which was chemicals. And then they were able to pivot. And when you look at Amazon, when you think about why are they able to do this, and these may be the two major capabilities that they have, and you may not need to fear anything else, but the things that they need to do really well for their core business, their retail business, is the back end. They need to do the back end really well to match suppliers with buyers in the long tail and this two-sided, multi-sided market, right? They need to be really, really damn good at that for that to work. That's AWS. And the AWS bet was simply, we are much better at that than you are, rest of the market. Now, others will catch up, but they had a core capability in their business that they could apply in other spaces. And Bezos was smart enough, and their current leadership was smart enough to separate those. Now, the core business can still benefit from the AWS capability. But another capability, which I hinted at, was think about the user experience when you go into Amazon. From the very beginning, if you click on something, aside from their algorithmic capabilities, which can discover all your weirdness, right? Like you ordered this, you might be interested in this other weird shit, right? So, but once you click on it, it goes into your cart, right? And once it goes into the cart, automatically it's matching vendors and logistics with how long it takes to get to you. That's a very, very interesting capability, right? And I've said this, and I said it in my book before this news even came out. If you wanted to predict where Amazon might disrupt other businesses, I would not want to be Ryder. I would not want to be U-Haul or any other logistics companies, and maybe even Cisco, because now Amazon went into Whole Foods. So they have an elite supply chain and logistics capability that was obviously so good that at some point they might say, who are we better than? Who could we share this with? And this is called make or buy, right? Are you familiar with make or buy?
No, tell
What it
me.
means? Make or buy means when you're another company, besides Amazon in this case, you have the decision to create your own logistics and supply chain and deliver on it. And you may not be good at that. And you may not have the scale. Or you could buy it from somebody who has that. They're just better at that than you. And although you have to pay a third party, their scale is so much better that it might be cheaper to buy it from a third party than to deliver it on your own because you have to build it, maintain it, etc.
Makes
That's
sense.
what make or buy means. So you either make it yourself, that includes the learning costs, etc., or you buy it from somebody who's just better at it than you. Most of the world works that way. That's how supply chains work, value chains work. You outsource when it makes sense, you insource when it makes sense. If it's strategically critical, you might keep it indoors. But one of the things I was thinking along the way was, hey, who else is really good at logistics? And would they possibly enter this space? And people love to bash on Walmart. But if you think about anybody who has an elite supply chain and logistics capability, it's them. And it's also Amazon. And what you wonder is, why has Walmart not done that? And then strategically, as a strategist, you might say, well, is Amazon doing too much now? Are these too many businesses to cover? Will they be able to maintain their retail, AWS, and supply chain at the same time and logistics? That's unclear. But what is really interesting about Amazon, it's one of the very few companies, aside from Fujifilm, which I've decided, that's able to take its core capabilities and create new business models. And that's really interesting because most companies cannot do that. They barely understand what they're good at in the first place.
A couple interesting things here is that Amazon still has a deal with USPS that ends October of 26. They're going to remain at 80% of volume until then. I do want to do a callback to, well, not a callback because we haven't talked about it before, but there's an older article in the Wall Street Journal in an op-ed that labeled it a $1.46 subsidy per Amazon package that the USPS was paying because they charged such low rates to Amazon for the bulk. So that's been there. So Amazon has used the USPS to subsidize its package delivery for a very long time, while it's now launching its own capabilities. Interesting turn of events.
Okay, one comment, because we're going to talk a lot about government in this episode. That is not Amazon's fault.
No, I agree.
Do not write subsidies in that fashion or laws in that fashion that private businesses can take advantage of it.
No, I agree. So another point here is Procter and Gamble is one of the first customers to be using this.
Yeah,
They're
that's
a very big competitor with Amazon. They have a lot of the same CPG market or CPG market, consumer packaged goods. And Amazon has a history, not necessarily them as a company, but employees. They have a lot of employees who don't act correctly all the time with data. For instance, we've had instances where Amazon has used marketplace seller data to build competing products with people selling a lot on the marketplace. We've
White
had
labels.
FTC alleged Amazon, they held onto children's voice and geolocation data indefinitely from Alexa interactions when they weren't supposed to. And then we had an incident of a Ring employee who viewed thousands of recordings belonging to female users at one point in time. And some of those are the company, some of those are just rogue employees. But Procter and Gamble, for instance, because they're such a direct competitor, having all of their logistics and essentially their map of how they do business in Amazon's hands poses an interesting question. Now, they have that problem with anybody who does their logistics, but Amazon's a competitor because they make a lot of the same products. It's just an interesting
Well, I think
relationship.
Procter and Gamble is one of the best, how do you say it? They're one of the best examples. There are two concepts in branding. One is a branded house, and one is a house of brands. Nestle is a branded house. Everything has Nestle's name on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are benefits to that and negatives to that. There are trade-offs. P&G has its tentacles literally everywhere. But you don't know it because they're a house of brands. P&G underlies all those brands. And what's interesting, and why I even came to Walmart, is because Walmart buys a hell of a lot of P&G's products. Yeah. So there's that competition too. Walmart is a retail competitor of Amazon. So what does that mean? And this is always a danger. Let's harken back to Apple. We just talked about them. If you depend on someone who owns the channel, who owns the customers, there's always the risk they can copy your branded product and white label it or private label it, which simply means copy it and produce a cheaper version.
Yeah.
It's just a trade-off. I don't have a good answer. One of the things you could ask yourself as a consumer is, which is better for consumers? I'm not going to answer that. You have to think for yourself. But this is the dilemma of these massive brands when the channels are changing right now. And AI is causing a lot of that.
Let's move on now to Nvidia, who announced this week it's investing $500 million in Corning, the American glassmaker best known for making screens on your iPhones, to expand optical fiber manufacturing by 10x. Corning stock jumped 14% on this announcement. Corning is planning a 10x expansion, Mike, of its optical connectivity capacity. How does a company justify a bet of that magnitude?
What is the best way to pipe this information? Is it through copper? Is it through fiber? What is it? And it's interesting. That is a very difficult space, materials, for any startup to ever enter. Because you think Corning, I think it's Owen Corning, if you look at it, right? Very traditional company. I think they're even into insulation and fibers and maybe even asbestos. You can look that up, edit it out if you need to, right? But that's interesting, right? It's not just the data that's out there, right? That's hard enough to produce and compute. It's the pipes. That's infrastructure. So I think as the problem of compute grows ever more severe, the question is, what is the extra infrastructure that you're going to need? And infrastructure never sounds to me like startup. That sounds to me like massive capital investments that probably older companies own or governments need to invest massively in. But you know more, you know much more about telecommunications than I do.
I think it's a huge. I mean, it's a safe bet for them. They've got all this revenue agreement in place that it's going to be paid for. At least for the next 4 to 5 years, it'll be paid for completely. The 10x increase. That's a lot. That's a big sum. My old company I used to work for had an agreement with Corning for the past 2 years. They were buying 10% of all Corning's production of fiber, and
Yeah.
that's to help with AI infrastructure because telecom companies build the fiber into those buildings, and then the companies, whether it's Google talking to itself or other companies coming into the data center, they buy pathways into the data center through the telecom providers, AT&T, Verizon, Lumen, etc. So there's been a big demand for fiber from telecom from a infrastructure route. We're also upgrading our Metro Ethernet loops to 3.0, which is now going to be capable of 400 gigs, where we're currently in 2.0 metro areas can only do 100 gig. So there's a lot of things going on where we're upgrading essentially the internet backbone right now to 400 gig from 100 gigs.
Yeah.
Essentially what's happening. So that's happening already. And then we got the AI data center infrastructure build on top of that. So fiber production, Corning isn't the only player, but they're one of the few players. So that production is extremely valuable. And for them to 10x it is crazy, but it's there. So what I read about this that I didn't realize is that, of course, inside of GPUs and processors are a lot of copper connections. And what we're talking about here is because of the way that Nvidia does, it'll have 100 Nvidia AI GPUs inside of a unit, and they all have to be connected together. On a personal computer, it'd be what's called an SLI bridge, essentially. These are all SLI together, and it's done through copper today, but they're going to change that to fiber optic. It's crazy. It's going to reduce the heat generated, which is going to reduce the power consumption. So it's just going to be a big step forward in our efficiency quotient on AI compute. I think it's really cool. Really cool.
Well, it's one of the things in innovation you always have to look at is if there are barriers somewhere, there's the opportunity to create substitutes somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's just the way the world works. And comes to geopolitics, there's this idiocy that if you own one resource, that you will dominate the world. And well, if you try, there's then the incentive, the counter incentive to create substitutes. And it happens again and again and again. And well, politicians have a tendency to not learn very fast, right? But markets do learn. They learn very fast because people win and lose money at scale trying to answer these questions. And I think this is a very good example, like a traditional industry, a traditional company like Corning can benefit massively from shifts in the market, right?
That's why we're having a race for who owns all the moon rocks right now, essentially with China. It's not really, not really said that way, but it's what it is. All right, Anthropic now. They're the company behind Claude, if you're not familiar, is reportedly finalizing a funding round that would raise $50 billion and value the company at $900 billion, putting it ahead of OpenAI for the first time. For context, Anthropic was valued at $61 billion just 14 months ago. If you formed your prior on who won the AI race in 2022 and never updated it, Anthropic's valuation this week is a significant correction. What does it say about business strategy, Mike, when the quieter company, the one that shows enterprise customers over consumer downloads, ends up the more valuable one?
It tells you why this show is called Show Your Priors. It tells you that in geopolitics and business and the environment in general, markets, etc., they move so damn fast. If you're beholden to a prior, you better be willing to update it. And here's a good example. Are Anthropic and OpenAI doing the same thing? And this goes back to classical strategy. What you would call OpenAI is a B2C business because that's how they grew. They grew in B2C very fast, very successfully. And it looked like, I think for most people, winner take all. But it turns out when you offer it for free and you don't check who's willing to pay, and a lot of their users are not, they were already complaining when they released ads. Like, that was already beyond the pale for a lot of users. And then Anthropic comes along out of their own team, actually, and this is typical in business. They come up with a different theory and they come into enterprise. Enterprise is B2B. That's a very different game with very different revenue profiles. So OpenAI started with massive volume and basically a freemium business model. It's free to use, and if you want to upgrade to more capacity, more queries, whatever you want to call it, more compute is actually what's behind it. You have to upgrade and pay more. B2B is a different game. It's not as easy to acquire customers, but once you do, the revenue profile is much different. Per customer, the revenue is much more. The margin is much more because you're not dealing with freemium. You don't even start freemium, you start already in a premium game. So I think that's what you have to think about when you look at these two companies. They've chosen, whether consciously or not, two very different roads to market. And that's something you always need to keep in your mind when you're comparing AI companies, especially the LLMs. They are segmenting right now. And those segments determine what strategies are available, what business models are available, what pricing power is available, and why Anthropic's valuation is rising so fast, because they're going deeply into enterprise to be checked by the way, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, because they own the channels, right? So that's the question. How will Anthropic deal with that? But I think this is a very interesting experiment we're seeing live. Is a B2C model, OpenAI, versus a B2B model. Which will be more successful over the long term? We don't know at all. I'll just say that. That's the prior I have. And will OpenAI choose to pivot to B2B? Can they now, or is it too late? Will Claude abandon B2C? Like, I don't care about you, just users out there, coders, indies, whatever. That's not for me. I'm here for the big conglomerates, the big corporates. That's what we're here for. So this is a very interesting case, and it's clear to me why Anthropic caught up, but I don't think it's a race that's already run. It's just we got to look. These are different models now. It took a little time to get there, but they're different business models completely, different go to market.
This will put them in SpaceX territory. SpaceX was probably going to IPO between 1.2 and 1.5 trillion. This is going to put them right up there next to them. Yeah, this should be their last funding round. OpenAI's was, I think, 852 on their last one, and that was probably their last funding round as well. So interesting how things have kind of shifted here at the end, especially after Anthropic getting blacklisted by the government, which we'll talk about that here in a bit. All right, this one should be up your alley, Mike. Researchers at Ep.10 just built a new benchmark and found that AI models routinely hallucinate their sources, citing real articles. I want to make a statement here, because when I was researching this story with Claude, I had Claude summarize the paper for me, and I read everything in his summary and started asking it questions, and then asking for dates and other sources to back that up, etc., and found that Claude told me a completely wrong article.
Bullshit.
It came back with an article from 2025 is May, and it was an article about giving AI subtle hints and then asking it, and AI would lie to you and tell you something different about how it didn't use the hint. And that was the article it gave me versus the article that it's actually about here. I finally got Claude to read it. I actually read it. Very interesting. But Mike, let's just pass it over to you. What do you think about hallucination here with sources, which this study was actually about?
I always go back to the causes.
Yeah.
And I'll always do that. This is a probabilistic machine, and it's a black box. The people running this don't exactly understand why it behaves like it does. And a lot of it has to do with neural networks and being probabilistic. Stochastic is the bigger academic word you want to say. I knew that when I came into using these machines, and I was naive when I started using it. And through lots of pain, building my own applications, did I learn this machine has a very great tendency to lie to you. And again, it's a machine. It's not intentional lying. It's just lying because of the structures behind it. So it's confabulating is a better word. It creates truths that don't exist. It creates probabilistic scenarios that look real but aren't. And that's okay. Like if you're speculating, if you're wargaming, if you're doing trade-offs, etc., that's really useful actually to help me as a strategist to think what could possibly be and what are the trade-offs. But we did an earlier show on how this can very quickly turn into this is the portrait of Dorian Gray. Like you are depending on this model to present some kind of truth back to you, and it lies persistently. I ran into this again this week, just creating static HTML pages. I said to Claude several times, Claude Code, where you're paying $200 a month, and probably that doesn't cover their costs, to be fair. But here are two sites that I have created, analyze them, and it misrepresented what was at the sites completely. And then I had to say, that is not what it says at those sites. And it says, oh, you're right. Sorry. And it told me this. I used a cheaper model. This is interesting. I used a cheaper model to analyze those sites, and that cheaper model hallucinated. Right?
Yep.
And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? And you're right. This gets me triggered. You can play whatever triggered GIF or video you have. But this is a fundamental limitation of these models. And as far as I can see, whether it's 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, or Mythos, or whatever's coming, this has not been solved. And I think this will arise later in some of our topics. It's a black box. This is the problem. That the people making it don't know what it is actually doing. And Judea Pearl, the godfather of neural networks and causal models, has always said this is a problem. That we don't know how they're working. It's a black box.
Yep.
Which means if you're using it in an ER, go harken back to that Harvard model, we don't know why it's even outperforming an ER doctor or a internal physician. We don't know why. That's a problem. Because they're probabilistic, what if the next time they don't outperform? And that's in the ER. And it's just a random outcome, a stochastic outcome. So yeah, you can hear I'm a bit triggered by this. When you need it for deterministic tasks, which means if you do X, you get Y. And it turns out that you don't get Y, and then you don't even know why you didn't get Y because it lies to you about what X was. Oh, Jason, you said perform X. I didn't really do X, sorry.
Yep.
I did something like Z or A.
Yeah, we talked about it last week with Scout, making the mistake of hallucinating and shooting the wrong person, and then like, oh yeah, it's on second view.
Let's try again.
Try again. Like, sorry about that. I found it was very strange that Claude hallucinated on what article it decided to read and tell me about. Like, it wasn't anything that I had ever prompted it for. It just pulled an article out of seemingly thin air and told me about it.
Well, take it. And this is the scary part. Everybody who's vibe coding their ass off right now.
Yeah.
Are you checking?
They're not. No.
That's a big ass problem. And I think that's a business opportunity, by the way, on the other side, to mop up all the bullshit that we're releasing right now because we're not checking and we don't care to. Because the whole vibe right now is just get it out there, just execute, just throw it out there on the market. Well, legal liability is going to call your card at some point.
Well, it was like the authors of that paper. They created I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a benchmark essentially that measured hallucinations with sources. So, they'll essentially have to be a checker
Well,
for everything.
I think so. And we're placing that bet that you need verification audit. It's easier to verify and audit facts. Like this is what Homer wrote. It is way more difficult to speculate. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are taking the opinion and the speculation as that's real.
Let's move to the fire hose.
Let's do the finals.
Rapid fire news segments. Twist on this segment this week. This is going to be completely produced by Claude Sonnet 4.6. Claude has written my scripted parts for this, and it also picked the stories we're going to talk about. So let's see what we have in store tonight. I've already looked at some of these. They're paragraphs. I told it for 2 sentences and no more. Anthropic signed a deal with SpaceX to use its Colossus 1 data center, adding the equivalent of 220,000 Nvidia GPUs of computing power within a month and doubling rate limits for paid users of its Claude Code developer tool. The subplot worth at least mention here is Elon Musk called Anthropic misanthropic and evil last year, then met with the team, changed his mind publicly on X, and SpaceX is now Anthropic's single largest compute supplier. Not bad, Claude.
Well, I guess in the mind of, would you call him Papa Elon?
Papa Elon.
Yes. Evil means you're not a paying customer. Virtuous means you're a paying customer. So if you start to pay, then it's amazing what dollar bills can do to the definition of virtuous.
Yeah.
That's my only comment there.
We'll come back to that one with the White House later. Pennsylvania became the first state to file a government-level lawsuit against an AI company after a government investigator found a character.ai chatbot named Emily, described on the platform as a doctor of psychiatry, provided her with a fake medical license number, and offered a mental health diagnosis. The company says it has disclaimers noting that its characters are fictional.
Yeah. Well, psychiatrists can issue drugs, so let's hope that the AI cannot do that. If it's hallucinating, it might actually prescribe hallucinogens, right? We have enough of those going around, opioids as well. I'm actually just curious how it performed. Did it do a good job, or would it do a good job? It's kind of the same dilemma as we talked about above in the ER about AI safety in medicine. What are the trade-offs between allowing innovation but regulating and making sure that consumers are safe? And let's say this, I have a strong opinion on licensing and cartels. A lot of this licensing is well-intentioned in medicine and law, etc., but it creates a cartel situation where it's very difficult to innovate even if your intentions are good, right? So that's a good debate to have as you get new technologies and new ways of improving potentially consumer care and psychology and psychiatry and medicine, but paying respect to safety, right? It's difficult. I don't have a perfect answer, but I'm always skeptical of licensed professionals saying we need more regulation because that makes the barriers to getting a license typically higher, which allows them to bank.
I've never been on character. Well, I'm on character AI right now. If you ever go there, I don't know how you could confuse this with actual medical advice in the first place. Companies need to make sure that they understand they're responsible for what their AI that they put out there does. And it's just going to be the end of the story, I think.
Probabilistic, though.
Yeah.
And sycophantic, so it's going to tell you what you want. It's hard to predict.
Yeah. Okay. Shake Shack shares. Shake Shack shares fell by the largest amount in company history this week after missing earnings. And McDonald's CEO issued a direct public warning about consumer spending, citing declining traffic across all income levels. When McDonald's is losing customers, the spending stress signal is about as broad as it gets.
We talked about this on Five Guys. The broader strategic question I would be asking myself if I were at McDonald's, and I'm not. I do like McDonald's. I have kids. It's very convenient when you're traveling. Is this wallet pressure? Is this trading down, which you often see in the restaurant industry, or is it a broader shift in consumer taste? Because that one is fatal. If it's a broader shift, that becomes fatal for McDonald's. That's different from pricing. And if inflation cools down, if the Strait of Hormuz, if the supply chain, whatever you want to call it, um, eases up, right? The pressures in the supply chain ease up. Is it price or consumer taste? I don't know the answer, but that's what I'd be freaking out about if I were a restaurant chain.
Well, let's loop in this next one too. Whirlpool reported that what an analysts are calling recession level demand destruction in major appliances this week, driven by a collapse in home renovation activity and consumers pulling back on big ticket purchases. Appliance sales are one of the clearest leading indicators of whether households believe things are about to get better or worse.
Yeah, given the source that we're looking at here, we don't have to say the name, but often there's this doomerism, if that's even a word I'm creating, if it's not, doomerism.
I know what you mean.
But when you're looking for signs of a recession, you can find data everywhere for it. And this is one of the things when I combined it with the McDonald's data and the Whirlpool data. Are there other signs out there that suggest the opposite?
There
Is
are.
hiring? Yeah.
Six
And so
Flags
then,
is up right now.
yeah, and that's totally like leisure spending,
Yeah.
right? You could look at other things like alcohol spending, but although alcohol probably is one of the most robust
Yeah, it's hard to
products
say.
that exist, you celebrate, you buy
Might be recession
alcohol.
proof on that.
If there's doom, you buy alcohol, right? So I think that was what I was thinking with appliances. It's totally legitimate to look at appliances and people trading down. But you don't know why they did that. Was there a subsidy in the past, like some of these climate subsidies that allowed you to buy better, more energy efficient appliances? And that game is up. I don't know, but I think you see what I'm doing here. As we see the negative signs coming in, I'm just thinking on the fly. Are there positive signs so that we get both sides, and then you can come to better conclusions.
I'm not. My take is that appliances are a real need, and people who may be able to put a purchase off because they have a good pair, but people who actually need them, they can't afford them right now. People who actually go to McDonald's may not have access to debt. People who go to Six Flags have access to debt. They'll put that crap on Klarna, on buy now, pay
Credit
later,
cards.
whatever. Credit cards, run that up because, woo, why not? We're a big casino. Our debt as a nation is above our GDP right now. Let's just keep that card going. All right. Intel, that's my doomer take. Intel shares hit a record high this week after reports confirmed a deal to manufacture chips for Apple devices in the United States. A move involving direct White House engagement to reduce American dependence on Taiwan's TSMC for semiconductor production. The deal validates Intel's U.S. foundry strategy as it gives Apple a domestic chip option for the first time.
We talked earlier about dual sourcing in the context of Apple triple sourcing. I think it only makes sense. And with the geopolitical activity going on, it makes even more sense. But it does call into question the late 90s, early 2000s, the offshoring strategy. And a lot of those decisions, and this is one of my biggest critiques in corporate, they were made on the pure financials, just the numbers. But numbers are abstractions. Numbers depend on you getting the qualitative information in the world correct and thinking about the future scenarios that could occur. And I don't want to bash any department, but in corporate, often decisions are purely number based that you just totally ignore geopolitics, culture, everything else, which is insane because those things drive business, they drive consumer trends, right? And so that's a good question. Is this an example of reversing the offshoring that we did earlier or not? Or is it just for chips? Does it apply to textiles? or other commodities. I don't know yet. But I do want to say and emphasize that when you are making a decision to offshore or not, you have to take into account the entire environment that you're operating in. And you have to, and this is very difficult, you have to think forward to future scenarios that could play out. It is not entirely unforeseeable that protectionist presidents will exist. It is not. We had Ross Perot early, didn't we? We did. Didn't win, but it was foreseeable, probably, that one of the parties would go protectionist. It's not predictable which one, but it did happen. And my point is you have to include that in your strategic thinking, that this is possible.
Well, I think it's a great thing that we're divesting from Taiwan. It's just a very strategically vulnerable spot right now. But I do also want to call out the Trump administration took a 10% stake in Intel summer of 2025, and then immediately turned around and began pressuring Apple to have a chip buying relationship with Intel. Go figure. Now it happens, and I'll call it. It used to be called the Pelosi effect. She's retiring. Let's call it the Trump effect. Maybe the Mark Wayne effect.
Later, you're going to say something like they're anti-regulations, but that looks like not.
That I have some takes on that too. Okay, Michael Burry, the investor, has made famous by The Big Short for predicting the 2008 housing collapse. He disclosed this week that he has fully exited his GameStop position after the company's CEO gave a widely panned interview on CNBC that left analysts confused about the company's direction. Burry has doubled down on Lululemon now as his next conviction trade.
So the background here is that GameStop was looking to buy eBay.
Yes.
That, before any CEO ever talks, is really damn confusing.
It's a stunt.
Is it a stunt? I don't even know if it's a stunt. I don't know what it is, but most M&A fails. Keep that as your prior. Most M&A fails at a 70 to 90% clip because the two companies clash in their business models and strategy, and it plays out and the cultures are completely different. That's the superficial reason people say they fail, because the cultures clash, but it's actually upstream. What capabilities does GameStop have that suggest that it could run eBay? There's silence on both of our sides.
So,
and did Michael Burry need that interview to see that? I mean, that for me, that's an insane move as somebody who worked in M&A and led it.
That interview was crazy. If you haven't seen it, I linked it to you earlier in the week, but that was a crazy ass interview. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's GameStop CEO, CNBC. It'll be out there, really easy to find. The guy's name is Cohen, I believe. But crazy interview. He's trying to buy a company that's 4 times worth the value of his, and he keeps saying it's going to be half cash, half stock. And it just the math doesn't math, and you couldn't get a good answer out of him. So basically the way this would work is that the deal would be 80% debt. It's just a non-starter. It's a bad idea from every angle unless there's some genius play that they have to make eBay more profitable. They don't. It's a stunt to get headlines. And it backfired.
For me, the size, yeah, insane.
Yeah.
Even if it were smaller than GameStop, it still doesn't make sense.
It still doesn't make sense, right? Yeah, that's crazy. It's crazy. Anyways, let's not give that one any more time. Novo Nordisk shares surged this week after the company raised its financial guidance on the back of accelerating commercial momentum for its oral GLP-1 weight loss pill, reversing a roughly 40% decline from its peak. The competition between Novo and Eli Lilly for dominance in the largest new pharmaceutical category in a generation continues to heat up.
That's right. My only question is, will it be OTC, over the counter? Because if it is, then I have no more excuses to not, to remain fat.
I don't think GLP-1 will be over the counter, but
it might.
It might. Is it
Who
going
knows?
through approvals for
Who
that?
knows? Who knows?
So far, no, but maybe someday.
I could also just attribute it to needle fear. So
there's also another story related to that we're going to come to in a minute. I saw. Let's just go ahead and skip down and then I'll come back because it kind of rolls in. Whey protein prices have surged due to global supply crunch, creating shortages across the supplement industry and the broader protein-enriched food category that has grown dramatically in recent years. When the commodity behind a premium consumer good tends to get when the commodity behind a premium consumer trend gets squeezed, the margins and the trend tend to compress together. Claude, that was a tongue twister, buddy. What do you think on what's your take on that one, Mike?
Guess I'll have to get ripped the old-fashioned way. What was that? You eat boiled eggs
Yeah.
and chicken, but it turned out we also had an egg shortage recently. So
Yeah.
I think the analysis there is not exactly wrong that when your diet depends on commodities and they get squeezed, you got to find other ways to get ripped.
Well,
Right.
so the tie-in here with the GLP-1 is that because of the popularity of Wegovy, GLP-1, all these drugs, people don't eat a lot. So they're trying to supplement protein. So we've seen
Yeah.
everything from Pop-Tarts with protein, candy bars with protein, just all different kinds of protein products popping up. And the way that gets there is this whey powder. And it's causing a massive supply crunch. The other side of that coin is the way that the whey protein is made. It's a byproduct from milk or cheese. It's byproduct from when you're making cheese,
Dairy.
milk. Yeah, dairy. So as they're increasing production of whey, but now there's also another milk product out there, cheese product out there that's getting there's way too much of it now, so prices are extremely falling, and it's harming that industry at the same time. So it's a really weird thing. I need to do a little bit more research into it. I wish I knew more off the top of my head, but it's a kind of an interesting topic because just that protein demand is causing a lot of other things to go out of. Yeah,
Trade-offs.
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, LinkedIn launched a significant overhaul of its job search tools this week, allowing users to describe what they are looking for in plain conversational language rather than keyword queries, along with AI coaching on how to position their applications. Good luck. If you are currently in a job search, this one is worth checking. Is it worth checking out? I haven't checked it out yet, but that does not sound like it's worth checking out to me, Mike.
My only question is, can AI tell me why I'm still getting ghosted?
Nope. It's because the jobs probably aren't real.
They're not real.
No.
Maybe they were hallucinated by AI.
I've got this company
I
that
don't
reaches out to
even
me
know
every
if
week
Yeah.
with fake
I
jobs.
don't even know if the HR departments exist anymore. Are they just AI in the background hallucinating job descriptions?
You want your company to look healthy. And you also want your name to get out there. So if you're,
Yes.
anyways, two reasons they go give you fake jobs. A new reported piece examines whether employers are beginning to value demonstrated AI capability over traditional 4-year degrees, as AI tools increasingly replicate the practical outputs those degrees were supposed to certify. The question has been raised before, but the evidence supporting it is accumulating faster than it was a year ago.
Yeah. And that article is from the New Yorker. And let's just say the New Yorker is friendly territory for academia. Interpret that as you will. So if the New Yorker is raising this question, then it's more severe than we probably think. And I think now we talked about that with Harvard and ER, the emergency room, and doctors and medical schools. The only thing I believe still holding up traditional academia is the signal of a degree. But this is the question. How long can that hold? That's the single most valuable moat for academia, is that degree that it signals. Well, what does it signal, Jason? Does it signal competence, capability,
It signals that
or is
you stuck with it.
or that some people call that grit?
Yeah.
Or I'll make the argument that most education throughout all of history has mostly signaled social status. What it tells you is you have a stamp that says you're in the right group, you have basic skills, your family's well off, I'll hire you, because who knows how your family might help my business or whatever. That's been the case since ancient China. That hasn't changed. The only question is, does that premium hold anymore? Is it enough to only signal social status? Or with the rise of AI, do you actually have to signal competence? And if AI is able to test your actual capabilities and competence, That could be a revolution in education. And certain companies, to their credit, like Google, have gone the route of training people without a college education to be project managers. Coding has traditionally been less about social status and academic prestige and the degree, and more about your portfolio. You come from a background of making video. That has nothing to do with degrees. In the
Yep.
end, it's your portfolio. Like, what can you actually do?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, you can get introduced to some people if you were at the right school or whatever, but you're still not gonna you're gonna flop if you can't do anything.
Watch Jason's videos. Watch all of them. Watch all of the videos that we're making.
Yeah, tell me how I do. The
Yeah.
Pentagon released what it called never before seen files on unidentified aerial phenomena this week, following a presidential directive to declassify the material. And it said it will continue releasing additional files on a rolling basis every few weeks. The Defense Department said, and this is a direct quote, people can make up their own minds.
Yeah, they can. Where are we going to take this on a business and strategy show? I'll just get straight to the point. The show is called Show Your Priors, and I think this is one of the cases where it's most obvious that you need to think in probabilities. There's the first question. What is the probability that aliens exist at all? What's the answer?
For me, it's individual answer, I would assume, but for me, it's 100%. I think aliens exist.
Well, let's say 99%, 99.9%. There's a
Sure.
high
I
probability,
agree.
given the vast expanse of the universe, that there's something else out there. That's a separate question. This is how I want you to think about this when you see articles like this. It's a separate question from what's the probability that they're here on Earth? What's that one?
For me, unlikely. Very unlikely.
Here's another one. There have been lots of sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena. I think that's what we're calling them, or inexplicable would probably be even a better word to say. We've seen them. They are weird.
Hmm.
I have to say, as somebody who's highly skeptical of these phenomena, they are weird and they're not easy to explain. So you'd say, what is the probability of those craft being experimental US military craft?
Pretty high, in my
Pretty
opinion.
high, probably high. Look at our budget. What's the probability of them being foreign craft or foreign military experimental
Less
craft?
likely, but also high.
Or, but what if I said drones?
Very high.
Very high then, right? Or it is just possible. What is the probability that the US government just doesn't have a clue? That's very high. And one of my favorite thinkers out there, Michael Shermer, makes the comment about conspiracies. How do we know that this is not a conspiracy of the government? Because it worked, right? And that's something you got to keep in your mind as a prior. Government in most cases, and we'll get to leaks, etc. later. There's just a very low probability that they're able to carry out something like this at mass scale with the type of people that are in office. That's your prior. Until we have evidence to prove otherwise. But I have to admit, in my own case, that the inexplicability of these aerial phenomena does probably raise the probability from extremely low to a little bit less extremely low that there's something weird going on. And that's where I'll leave it. I just think this is a good way to think about probabilities is that your starting point is maybe low probability, but as you get inexplicable evidence, you need to update your priors.
Yeah.
And we all love to bash on the conspiracy theorists out there, but if there's evidence, we should update accordingly, according to the sources, according to the evidence, not just wild speculation.
I am not a conspiracy guy. I wouldn't characterize myself
Me
as
either.
that, but I do find them interesting and interesting thought experiments. So I'll watch some videos on some to fall asleep to.
The broader question is, what if it were true? Because this happens in business too.
Yeah.
If they are real, what's the strategy for dealing with them? And that comes up in business. Like there's a low probability bet of a startup. They're basically like a UFO out there. This startup has no chance of entering our space, like Owen Corning. What's the probability somebody enters our space with some new fiber technology as a startup? Just low.
Yeah. Well, what is it? Was it Hawking who said that he hopes we never make contact?
Well, yeah, they might be like us.
Well, I
There's
mean,
another theory out there by, I think, a guy named Robin Hanson, who basically said if aliens are like us, the probability that they reach us is very low because they would have destroyed themselves already.
so I have back in 2024, there was I was really drawn into it because it was very convincing. There was a guy who came out from the military. He's retired. He was talking about the Tic Tac UFO or UAP. This Tic
Yeah.
Tac, just crazy movements. He saw it from a naval ship, whatever, and it happened 20 years ago. So he was, I guess, free to talk about it at that point. It was declassified. But at the same time, and I didn't put this together at the time, but there was another set of people out there at the exact same time talking about cubes above South Carolina and out into the ocean that were making the same type of movements Tic Tac was.
Yeah.
And they were both being presented as UFOs. They were both at the same time. And it was, I don't know. It was disinformation was the conclusion that I came to. Do your own research. But it was disinformation as conclusion because that was U.S. crafts they were testing.
Well, you have to do all your due diligence, right? Are these light phenomena, which happen all the time when you're flying, to the craziest theories of all, or other dimensions, whatever, right? But you have to do your due diligence, and I would say the healthy exercise is to assign probabilities because it forces you to think that way. What's the chance that this is real or not, given what we know?
Right.
And the moment you're sure is a bad sign for you. It's dangerous for your own thinking
Maybe.
in general. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe.
All right, let's move on because I think we've gone off into crazy territory a little bit.
All right, so let's move on to our main topic here. This is Anthropic's forthcoming model Mythos is so dangerous that Anthropic refused to release it publicly, though it did manage to leak it through a third-party vendor breach. This week, the Trump administration, which has spent the past year aggressively rolling back AI regulation, announced that it is now studying an executive order that would require AI models to go through a government approval process before release, comparing it directly to how the FDA approves drugs. JD Vance stood at a global AI summit 15 months ago and said, "The AI future is not going to be won by hand ringing about safety." Yeah. Now he's on an emergency call with CEOs of big AI, warning their technology could take down hospitals and water plants. Mike, what does it tell you when the most anti-regulation administration in modern memory is now the one asking AI companies to pump the brakes?
Well, let's fixate on the word anti-regulation for just 1 second. Let me do a little analysis on that. In general, yeah, there have been some rollbacks of regulations, but there have also been massive tariff increases. Those are regulations. Just something to think about. And I think the overarching theme when you think about this administration is the art of the deal. What is the art of the deal? For any topic that arises, I think the way to think about it is take a topic, you escalate it. Any topic, you escalate it, right? And then you threaten people based on that escalation. And you probably had some goal you wanted to reach, and you were starting out at a baseline of, let's call it X. And then you escalate, I want Z. And then there's the next step escalate, threaten, and then you back down. And then the middle ground is somewhere between X and Z. And then, yeah, the opposition backs down, you get Y, maybe even X, and you call it a victory, right? That's behind a lot of this. So my point on all that is I wouldn't take any statements out of this administration or previous ones as determining what the actual regulation will be or if there even will be regulation. The way it was cast by J.D. Vance in the first place, I heard that by innovators out of the U.S. I talked about in a previous episode Steve Blank standing in Imperial College in London saying you're you're regulating yourself out of innovation, right? China and the US are not waiting for you. The genie is out of the bottle. They're not going to wait. And this is the trade-off. And this is an honest debate, whether it's this administration or previous or the next one, that you need to have that balances innovation and safety. And I think you're seeing this play out in real time. That J.D. Vance's previous sentiment, and I think this is in general an American sentiment. We want to be the most innovative company or country on the planet, and regulation slows it down. Now, there are legitimate reasons to slow it down if there are safety concerns. Look at nuclear, look at many other topics, you can find them. I'm not going to harp on them. But there is a discussion between the two poles. And it turns out that that discussion is playing out inside of the administration, right? There's an internal person, I forgot his name, you'll find it, who disagrees with that. And what is that? Is that slowing down to have the discussion and having a pre-approval process for AI releases. But I have to remind you that safety is often a proxy for industry to create regulatory moats. Why is that? Well, look into the details in the article that this regulation, if it were to exist, if it's just even a board who discusses it, slows down every single AI company because it applies to all AI companies. And you should always be skeptical when you see something like that. And anytime that you see major corporates agreeing that this is necessary, your the spider senses should tingle a lot. If XAI and Anthropic, and you can name the other 3 or 4 that were involved, are agreeing that this is necessary, why are they doing that? Wouldn't you be at least a little skeptical why that might be? Well, the answer is typically because they get to write the rules together with government, regardless of the administration. I don't want to focus on this one because this has been true across time. They get to write the rules against which their competitors must compete, with which their competitors must comply, and that can be very damn expensive. And then the whole assumption behind this is that a group of companies and the government can control how AI is released. This administration, the previous administration, they're leaking ships. They can't keep any damn secret. Outside of a few military examples we've recently seen. Anthropic itself could not keep from leaking mythos. So even if you wanted to regulate this, this is one of the things you have to consider. Could you? So you impose cost on the industry, but you leak anyway, undermines the whole policy. So that's my long rant. And if you were going to analyze it and think about the trade-offs of innovation and safety, you need to think through all of it, cynically and not. They're all legitimate angles to look at it, I think. There are legitimate safety issues. There are legitimate innovation issues. And the analogy given was the FDA. I think that's not a good analogy for many reasons. The FDA, for one thing, when you're investigating drugs, it is not on the same development cycle that AI is. It is not at the same speed. So that's one thing. So you can't possibly have the FDA or something similar in government regulating something that's on 3-month release cycles. Government barely meets every 3 months, right? You know, I'm exaggerating, but that's the stereotype. The other thing is the FDA typically, the criticism you would have of the FDA is that people die while it's potentially investigating a good drug. And yeah, of course, it can regulate in a good way where people aren't harmed by bad drugs. Of course, you have both. The problem with AI is because it's coming out so fast, it's the opposite, it's the inverse, that the harm is already done, if there's harm. We've looked at articles, cognitive decline, etc. And I'm not an AI skeptic or doomer at all. But I think the analogy is flawed because the development cycles are too fast. And it again, it really just comes down to how much innovation do you want versus safety. And if you're in a geopolitical war, which I think a lot of people think we are, how much can you afford to put the brakes on?
Biden, I don't remember the year, but he founded the US AI Safety Board. Trump dismantled it and is now creating the CAISI, or the Center for AI Standards and Innovation. Another really interesting thing that I did was I looked up JD Vance and why is he the point guy for this? And well, look at his connection to Peter Thiel and look at Peter Thiel's connection to Elon Musk and all of the PayPal mafia, as I learned they were called today. Very interesting stuff as far as that's concerned. I'm not going to go too much into it, but very interesting. I think a lot of politics is theater.
Yeah.
The White House hedged this. So JD Vance is leading this SWAT team of all the best minds in the country to talk about how they're going to regulate the security risks of AI. And then we have the White House releasing a statement stating any policy announcement will come directly from the president, and anything else is
Yeah.
pure speculation.
Yeah. Well, art of the deal. 2 years ago or a year ago, when Vance makes the statement, it's a free for all for everyone. But recently, the topic of Anthropic came up with the Defense Department, and there was the whole drama around that. And art of the deal, again, escalate the topic. Is there something government wants from these AI companies?
A ballroom.
A ballroom, um, a new chip deal, a stake, something that you hint at coming regulations, even though previously you said they weren't coming, and then you get leverage. Because what do these companies fear? They fear regulation if they're not in control of it, right? If they're able to influence it, they're not so afraid, of course, right? So I think it's very difficult to interpret. I wouldn't overinterpret it in any direction yet until there's something concrete. And in this administration, there's never really anything concrete. There are mixed signals being sent out all over the place. Until there's something in writing, just treat it as very speculative in all directions. And remember
Your priors.
the priors and the art of the deal.
Um, yeah. Okay. All right. I think we should go now to our interview. It was a good one this week, Mike. We had guest Dan Toma come on. He's a leading corporate innovation thinker. I think you're really going to like this interview, and I hope you watch it and enjoy. Our guest today is Dan Toma. Dan is a 3-time author, a Thinkers 50 management thinker to watch, a World Economic Forum contributor, and a strategic innovation advisor to many blue chip companies. His books, The Corporate Startup, Innovation Accounting, and his latest, Open Innovation Works, have won multiple international awards and are considered essential reading for anyone trying to build innovation as a repeatable discipline, not just a one-time moonshot. Dan, thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get it started off with something I hope you'll enjoy. And that's understanding strategy is a core concept to what Mike and I discuss here each week. In that vein, can you explain the concept of a cargo cult and why it's such an interesting case study for how companies approach innovation?
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of cargo cults comes from an old book, and Michael, you might help me with the title, or you might help me with the publishing date, but God, it's probably 10, 15 years old book, something like that, and it's actually explaining how we as society create religions. So it's not a business book. It's a book that talks about religions. And apparently they researched some tribes, some native tribes in some on some islands in the Pacific.
Yeah.
And the story goes something along the lines of the war in the Pacific, Second World War in the Pacific. The US military needed some bases to resupply their troops that were fighting overseas against the Empire of Japan. And obviously, they found these islands. These people weren't necessarily, foreigners to the idea of white people and developments outside of their island, but they haven't actually interacted a lot with advanced civilizations over the past few hundred years. And when the U.S. military came, they set up outposts there, resupply bases. So these people were basically just seeing cargo planes landing, offloading, broken tanks, broken jeeps, broken equipment, taking off. The following morning, an equal amount of tanks was arriving, fixed and ready to go to battle. Same for jeeps, same for any other equipment. Well, it was all great for them to see this, and at one point the war ended, and the U.S. no longer needed those islands. They pulled out. They moved their supplies somewhere else. Now, what's interesting is what's happening today. And by today, I actually mean now in 2020, 26, right? So it's not like what happened 50, 60 years ago. It's just what's happening now. Now, these people on these remote islands still go to these abandoned runways every day. They light up fires and they do these like landing signals with fires, hoping that the cargo planes will return and they will bring food, they will bring medicine, and they would continue doing that cycle. So, in essence, what this story is telling us is that sometimes we tend to replicate the gestures without actually understanding how things are being made. And if you translate this to innovation, if you translate this to growth, right, you tend to have this perspective in an established organization that, look, if we're just going to copy the way things happen in successful and growing companies over here, copy it one to one, we are miraculously going to become as successful with growth as they are. And I'm not trying to criticize people now, but I've heard one too many stories of, established organizations going to Sweden and study the Spotify way. And they go and do the Spotify training. I'm not saying that Spotify training and Spotify way of working doesn't work, because it does, but it works for the Spotify context. Try applying that into an established bank, into an established pharma company, an established, you know, energy company. That will fail. So you have to understand what are the principles behind the Spotify way, with air quotes. It doesn't have to be Spotify, and then replicate that in your environment rather than just copying it one to one and hoping that miraculously growth will happen and agility will happen.
Yeah, it reminds me of what people often term innovation theater,
Yeah.
right? So you go through the gestures of having a big pitch day or a prototype day, and the teams who are often corporate teams, they go up there and they give presentations, there's a pitch, and it's going through the motions. But there's often just no serious intention to actually test these ventures in the market and then scale them. They get coffee mugs, or as Steve Blank says, they have lanyards everywhere, right? And that's where the innovation dies. It dies at the pitch. And then I've seen companies that will actually judge the pitches by simply an applausometer. Like applause is validation for whether you should invest in this venture or not. Now, I'm not saying venture capital is much better. Sometimes people just invest on energy, right, or the charisma of the founder, and then you go, and that's probably why the base rates for failure and innovation are so high. I want to come to the title of your book. Is it a statement or a question? Open innovation works, or open innovation works? I think we should probably start with, what is open innovation?
Yeah, listen, we picked that title on purpose. I remember when I had my session with Diana and with Esther, the co-authors talking about the title. I think it can be interpreted in many ways. It can be works as in the factory, like the factory where you have open innovation
Right.
happening. It can be a verb, right? Look, it works, or it can be a question. Does it actually
Yeah.
work? Obviously, I'll let the audience pick up the book, and they're going to be the judges of that. Um, what is open innovation? Well, there is a clear definition in the book, and I'm not going to cite from the book, but in my opinion, it's basically an innovation activity. Basically, you're creating something new, but you are creating it with an external partner, and you both benefit equally from that particular thing that you've created. And I think it's very important to make this distinction here because sometimes what I'm seeing in the work that we're doing at Outcome, I'm seeing that a lot of times people consider vendor management as open innovation, right?
Right.
We are going to do this POC with this startup and basically use their technology for free or for a very little amount of money. And obviously, the startup is interested because they want to associate with your big brand
It's a credibility play. Yeah.
for the startup, indeed. Um, and then the corporation calls it open innovation. Well, that's just vendor management. You're not doing
And this
any.
is some people call this venture clienting. Venture clienting ends up going in this direction quite fast. It's like putting a ribbon and a bow around what is actually just vendor management. Potential partners in the future where you do your POC, your experiments, and then perhaps there's a relationship that forms, and that's obviously beneficial for the startup, as you mentioned. But what else is
Mhm.
there? I mean, that's one option you might have is to
I mean, in the book, we're talking about six or seven various open innovation engines. We call them basically plays in open innovation. You can do venture clienting, right? Which is one as long as you do it properly. We're talking about corporate venture capital. We're talking about partnerships with universities. We're talking about incubators and accelerators. There's several engines, and the interesting thing about it is that they serve different purposes, and you need to pick the right one relative to your internal constraints in your organization, but also considering what you're trying to achieve with the open innovation play.
yeah. I talked to a professor at Stanford, I won't name his name, about open innovation. He was extremely cynical. And his statement was essentially, yeah, I don't believe in partnerships with externals. You can't even partner with your neighboring department in a corporate. How are you supposed to ever make that work? And I think what he was hinting at is the story you opened this with was the cargo cult, right? That often these external partnerships end up going through the gestures, holding the batons up with the light, right? But there's no actual impact. So if
Yeah.
you are going to, and you're the accounting guy for innovation, right? So if you are going to measure the impact of open innovation, what would your suggested metrics be?
Well, like with every other innovation, it should be ROI.
Okay.
Because if you're not measuring your activity on ROI or impact, right? Because it might just be, I don't know, you are the national health system of the UK.
Right.
You don't have ROI, but you have, for example, patient wait time, or you have
Correct.
other KPIs, right? So by ROI, I mean impact to a wider to
For some
wider sense.
customer segment, whether it's in a social enterprise or a private enterprise, right? Like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
has to
yeah.
actually create value for someone.
Exactly. It needs to create value. And this is why I'm using ROI because it's, again, a term that everybody's familiar with. But an impact is a bit more fluffy, although more encompassing. So yeah, I would only measure that. Everything else is just fluff. And to what the professor mentioned about open innovation and him being cynical, I sign up for that. I
Yeah.
I I'm not saying I don't believe in open innovation. I don't believe in the way we are doing open innovation these days.
Yeah,
What I'm seeing from my experience, and I'm happy to break some China on this podcast.
go for it. Go for it.
What what I'm seeing here is that over the past few years, I mean, Michael, we go back like what, 10 years? We know
Yeah.
each other from like the beginnings of the lean startup movement.
We have lots and lots of scars to show for this. So if you hear a
Exactly,
little bit of
exactly.
cynicism over the next 40 minutes or so, that's where it's coming from.
Exactly. I mean, what happened? We created Lean Startup and then the entire movement, and then we went into corporate innovation. And for about 10 years or so, these large organizations have tried to do internal innovation. Majority of them failed.
Yes.
Majority of them failed, and we can name names if we have to, but I'm sure that everybody that's listening to this probably knows of a story or knows somebody that has a story about how corporate innovation failed. And it failed for several reasons. I don't want to go into detail of that. Now, what are we seeing? We're seeing that basically large organizations over the past, I would say, couple of years, so probably starting 2023-ish, 2022, 2023, they've moved the focus from internal innovation to open innovation. They haven't fixed anything that was wrong with internal
Yeah.
innovation. And
Yeah.
they're not just doing open innovation hoping that they will succeed. Well, the writing is on the wall. They won't.
Yeah. So I think we have to actually address the issue then. So, what is it that causes internal innovation to fail? And just go straight to the heart of it. I have my theory, as you know, what causes that. You have your theory. It's not one theory that explains it all. It's a grab bag, right? But maybe one or two bullet points. I'll have mine, and then we'll go to why would open innovation actually solve it?
The quote at the beginning of the Anna Karenina book from Tolstoy. It says that
Yeah.
every happy family, every all the happy families are the same. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way.
Yes.
Uh,
I use this in my
translate,
book, right? I use it in my book,
right?
right? Yes.
Exactly. So
And the
translate.
point, yeah, the point is that yeah, all corporations, while they're going well, they probably don't need much innovation because the core business model is working well. It looks like they're innovative. Everything's going well. Google looks like Apple. Apple looks like Meta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody tries to benchmark them, as you mentioned. When the shit hits the fan, it's always for particular reasons. It's particular to a Spotify. It's particular
Mhm.
to an industrial company. It's particular to the business model. But there are, I believe,
Patterns.
overarching underlying reasons that go across all of those. What are
Yeah.
they? What are some of those
My
factors?
opinion is that if I look over the past again 10 years or so and my experience in the field, I would say one of the biggest failure was the inability of the organization to connect the strategic intent with the innovation activities, with the innovation
Yeah.
budget, with innovation cycles, with all of that. And BCG confirmed my opinion a couple of years back when they put out the research saying that only 12% of companies worldwide actually reported a connection between strategy and the innovation expenditure. So there is this huge disconnect, which obviously happens for several reasons, and in every organization is different. And then on top of that, we have poor governance, poor understanding of how we build and deliver strategy, lack of governance, lack of metrics. That's why I wrote the second book, Innovation
Yes.
Accounting, to
Yes.
address that. So I don't know. What's your take, Michael? What are your points?
No, I think when you first go into innovation in corporate, I think it's very much like cargo cult. You get into the gestures. Like you think it's an Osterweiler campus, right? You get into debates about are you filling that thing out correctly, right? Then you move on to lane startup, which is a game changer. You actually are testing stuff in the market. But then you run into this question of, hey, what if we actually find a business? What happens? Then you run into the corporate budget cycle. There's no actual
Mhm.
budget for you if you want to scale that thing. Why is there no budget goes to what you're talking about. The reason there's no budget is because you're not in the strategy. You're not in the
Yep.
strategic plan. And if you happen to have a great idea in the middle of April and the next budget is available in January, you're kind of out of luck, right? So it's what you said. It's the corporate is optimized for performing to the P&L on steady rhythms, 1 year cycle, right? 5 year plans, the 5 year Soviet plan, as I like to joke. And then that's how they govern. That is optimizing an existing machine. It's not doing what you're talking about, which is changing the business model, doing something fundamentally new, testing it. And most corporate executives, you can't even blame them. They have no idea how to do that,
Yep.
aside
Yep.
from give me the 5 year plan and go execute, you know?
I mean, if we don't go and change budgeting, we can't do anything
Exactly.
in a large organization. And we're still, I mean, we can talk about the best governance structure and the best stage gates and the best product lifecycle or idea lifecycle, whatever you want to call it. Trust me, I've designed a lot of those and they were great
Yeah.
to the point where we were at the mercy of the annual cycle. So it we could only do metered funding to a certain extent in our innovation department because then the entire metered funding structure was collapsing once we had to ask for a bigger budget because those annual cycles you're talking about are actually two annual cycles, so basically
Yeah.
every 2 years you get budget, not
Yes.
every year.
Yes.
If you have a good idea this April, you're not going to get it on the budget for next year. You're probably going to get it in your budget for two
Yes.
years from
You
now.
need to already have started lobbying, right? And I guess to wrap
Exactly.
up this section of why corporate struggle is a very, you know, cynical take that it's just two different machines, right? They're just never going to make it. That's
Yeah.
the way that it works. And the great hope of open innovation is like, well, we can't do it. So it's actually cynical if you think about it. Like we have abandoned hope of doing it internally because we can't do it. Let's just hope that these external people know how to do it, right? And there was even a
Yeah.
quote talking about what you're talking about from a president of a business unit somewhere in the world in a big corporation. He told me straightforward. He was at least honest. He said, Michael, if you want to build me an innovation program, I won't get the money. If you want to actually build business, I won't get the money. But if you frame it as this is an HR program to teach the culture of innovation, I'll get you all kinds of money.
Welcome to Innovation Theater.
Yeah. All right, Jason, bring us back on course.
Yeah. All right, Dan. You've written that without clear metrics, careers in innovation become cul-de-sacs. And that's a striking image. For the individual contributor, the analyst, product manager, or the sales guy, who don't have a budget or mandate, how do they make their innovation contribution visible in a company that doesn't have an innovation accounting system yet?
Yeah, well, my advice to them will be to write their CV and look for another job.
Fair enough.
Seriously, I wrote a piece a few years back, probably one of the most popular pieces of content I've put out, and the title read something like "Why a Career in Innovation is a Bad Idea." It is a bad idea, and to the point of your question, uh, I mean, go ahead and play around, experiment, pretend that you are Steve Jobs, do all of that, enjoy your time. But as long as the organization is not able to address those critical questions I was just, discussing with Michael, it's going to be very tough for you. Now, if writing your CV is not what you want to do, right? Because of personal reasons and motivation and all of that stuff, right? We all have a mortgage and we have kids to send to school and all of that. The next best option would be to move closer to core, move closer to the core of the business. That's where you're going to see more support. So try to make sure that your innovation is not totally disruptive, and make sure that it's not going to cannibalize on the existing core, because you're going to be nobody's going to like you in that organization. So
Yeah.
stay closer to the core, go into play around in the adjacent space, and that will be one advice. And the other advice is understand that you have to play the political game. You have to be a diplomat above all else. It's great that you're a great product owner or a good marketeer, but you also need to know how to work the network to get what you want, get those resources. The resources will come slow, to the point that we made earlier. But it's better to have resources in 2 years than not to have any resources at all.
Yeah.
Michael, what do you think?
Well, I was going to say that's a bit fatalist, right? Because if I listen to you, it's all true what you're saying, the challenges of doing it. But I think what it implies is that actually organizational DNA can't be changed. So, Jason,
Hmm.
you worked in sales. I'm sure you've heard this. Let's say you sell hardware, and your idea is simply, hey, we could sell a subscription with this new software we developed internally along the way. Your hardware guys aren't going to do that. Your sales guys, they're just not going to do it because their incentive is not to do it. They don't, one, the subscription is a fraction normally of the hardware that they're selling. So they focus their attention on where they can get the biggest commission, of course, right? It's understandable. But if you ask them to even sell a subscription, they don't even know how, right? They've never really sold SaaS before. And so what it sounds like is it's basically impossible to change the business model's DNA. And if you have ideas around that, all of the, and what Dan, you're hinting at heavily, is the politics forms around that entrenched business model. And
Hmm.
that's the hard part. It's not that you couldn't change the business model or test it, it's just almost impossible to get the resources to do so. And I guess my last point there is, as a startup, you would dream to have the resources of a corporate. That's the whole goal, is to get the resources of a corporate. And the irony of corporate is that you have all those resources, but you can't access it. You cannot get it, right? For your experiments. Did you ever run into that, Jason?
Oh, where I couldn't get backing for anything that I had? Yeah, all the time. Nobody wants to back a idea that's not their own or coming from down to up. It's not really. It's a really tough battle. Any things that I have come up with that are programs. Basically, the only thing that I've been successful with are my own efficiency innovations. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot that you can do.
Well,
It's pretty tough.
why would you, if you're sitting in corporate, ever listen to your salespeople who interact with the actual customers? Why would you listen to them?
Oh,
What do
it
they know?
seems like a terrible idea.
What do they know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Michael and Jason, to this point, whenever we are asked to build strategy for our
Yeah.
clients, we specifically have a stage in the process where we interview people, and
Yeah.
we actually, by design, we put there people from customer support, from sales, people
Yes.
that read complaints every day. We want to interview them for strategy, and we make sure that whatever it is that they are saying, bubbles up to the executive level and say, well, according to your sales force or to your customer support force, this is what your customers are complaining. So maybe this is a good strategic
Yeah.
direction.
You know the crazy thing about this? I always find this crazy. Any consultant worth their weight, what is the first thing they do when they want to assess what's going on in a corporate? They descend the corporate ladder down to the people in the field. Why do they do that? Because those people know what's going on. So the only question I ever have is like, why couldn't you just descend the corporate ladder yourself and talk to your own people? Instead, you have to pay BCG or Bain or McKinsey millions of dollars to talk to your own people, right?
Or outcome,
It's
or outcome.
or outcome. Preferably you go to outcome because you'll get an outcome, right? You'll actually meet one of these innovation metrics that Dan likes to talk about.
Well, there's a reason why they do that, Michael. To be honest with you, no, first of all, nobody's profit in their own land, right?
Yeah.
I was on customer engagements where we basically were working with the strategy leader or with the growth leader, and basically they gave us the brief for the board meeting. We actually haven't added one single word to that,
Yes.
and we agreed with it. We agreed. We read it and we agreed. It's like, oh, that's smart. You said that? Yeah, I said that. Well, why aren't you, in this case, presenting yourself in front of the board? Like, they won't listen to me. That's what they said. Like, okay, well, they're
No,
going to listen to you
it's
then.
it's a real thing. I wrote about in my book, right, that that's why people would go to the Oracle at Delphi, right? So
Hmm.
you get cover for political decisions you've already made anyway. Um, and I have a friend who works at a massive corporation, or he did in the past, a separate one. They paid McKinsey 4 million to just present the presentation they already made,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so I think people that really goes back to your point is that the politics are so strong that even when you know the answer and it's basically correct, even when a Dan comes in and says, "You got it, you nailed it,"
yeah.
you won't be listened to
Also,
unless
the
it comes
also
from the external.
also sometimes it's a question of psychological safety. So you might have a CEO wanting to speak with a junior sales rep or somebody in
Yeah,
customer support, and that person will not necessarily be honest with the
they're
CEO
afraid. They're afraid.
because of the imbalance of authority and power. But if they speak with me or with my colleagues, they will not self-censor, and they can tell us everything. And then it's going to be on to us to bring it to the CEO. And trust me, we have really thick skin. I mean, and we can definitely bring it up. So it's also that psychological play we need to consider, not just bashing away the corporate
No, it's
culture.
totally true. So there's a rational reason that people at the bottom don't expose all the faults of the company. And sometimes that goes overboard and turns just into a complaining struggle session, right? And that
Hmm.
also doesn't help, to be fair, on the other
Yeah,
side.
that's why we have very clear scripts and we stay on script.
Unlike us, Jason, what's up next?
Dan, you actually started with a degree in engineering before you pivoted to
Yeah.
entrepreneurship and then into the corporate innovation world. How did that engineering mind shape the way you think about innovation systems? Do you think the way an engineer would approach a problem is fundamentally different from how a business school graduate might?
Yeah, I have an engineering degree, electronics and telecom, and I also have an MBA. So I've seen both words for better or worse. The engineer in me says that for every single problem that we are facing, there is an underlying system issue that we haven't
Yes.
addressed.
Yeah.
So it's always the system, it's never the individual that is to blame.
By the way,
I'm not
that's
sure
not wrong. That's actually a very healthy way to look at a corporate organization. It's not a physical machine, it's a social machine, it's a social system, right?
I'm not sure what would be the MBA take on this, and obviously, if listeners here are happy to chip in with their comments, I'll be more than happy to read what would be the MBA take on that. As I said, I also have an MBA degree, but doesn't mean that this totally washed over my
Mm,
engineering background. Also, from an engineering perspective, and I think this is probably the mistake that a lot of engineers make, and I find myself doing the same mistake. We're looking for patterns, and we're trying to see everything in patterns, and we're looking for those patterns, and we're looking to justify our emotions at the end of the day with numbers.
yes.
And the more solid we think the numbers are, the more we believe our emotions to be correct.
So
Obviously, these
just like ChatGPT, you may find patterns that are hallucinations in the end
yeah,
that
yeah.
don't actually
So
exist. Yeah.
I know that sometimes even spending too much time on looking for the pattern is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. Let me go into the MBA thing. I'll do it very quickly.
Here you go.
One of the issues I think with the MBA is not looking at things as systems. And if you just look at the curriculum, it starts with you have your siloed marketing class, you have your siloed accounting class, your siloed finance class. You're basically mapping out the corporate departments that you're going to go work for. And then the question you would have, though, after you do all that, is how do they all fit together? And I simply don't remember, maybe it exists today, any class that ever put that whole business model strategy back together, pieced it back together. And when you get hired, and this is a great irony, I think, you get hired into corporate in a highly specialist role in an accounting department or a sales department. You're just the sales guy, Jason, by the way, just the sales guy.
Right.
Yeah. My question is, as they go up, when does the specialist become that generalist manager? Who trained them? How
Hmm.
is that supposed to happen? How are you supposed to go from you worked on the chassis the whole time to now you're doing the whole car, if you get my point? And I just don't know that we're teaching that well in education in general, but in MBAs especially. Any thoughts there? Or am I characterizing it too brutally?
Um, no, I agree with that. I agree with that. Nothing.
Good.
Well, Dan, I didn't mention this at the top, and I should have, but you're CEO of Outcome and also co founder of that business consulting firm. Tell us a little bit about your day to day and what Outcome's goals are.
Yeah, what we're trying to do with outcome, and probably now it's obvious, for the listeners. We're trying to add pragmatism to growth. So we're coming into a business, and we're really focusing on growth, innovation-led growth to some extent, but not only. This is, to the point earlier, we're working with CVCs, we're working in M&A. So we're doing a lot of growth related work, but we're trying to add pragmatism to growth, and we're trying to um, make sure that we never lose focus of what we're trying to achieve. We never get bogged down into the details of the work and forget about what we're trying to achieve. This is why the name outcome,
Which is, as you said earlier, must be ROI.
which must be ROI or impact, right? To a certain extent.
Yeah.
We've been on projects even for prof or for-profit organizations where by design the project that we were in wasn't ROI in the sense of top line growth. They had to achieve other things like employee engagement or entering a new market, although entering that market would have come at a cost. Just being there and achieving a certain market presence was considered impact. So yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we stand for. Obviously, a lot of analytics involved. A lot of the stuff that I wrote about in innovation accounting, we actually live by it. Um, right, we're looking at those KPIs. We're looking at KPIs such as, cost of failure, new product vitality index, all the KPIs that make sense to implement whenever you're trying to grow.
One of the criticisms I have of our own people in innovation is it's often you blame the corporation, you go into this spiral of just, yeah, corporate will never work, etc. But we often just don't speak the language of the
Mhm.
CFO, for example.
Yeah.
And in my experience, it's not that the CFO can't understand the metrics like you're developing, ones that actually matter. It's just that they don't know them.
Yeah.
They're used to core business metrics, and you're coming in saying, hey, actually, you could measure the impact of innovation. They're just different metrics. Can you give the listeners some idea of what kind of metrics you might look at? You talked about cost of failure. I know you're big on like learning velocity is another one,
Mhm.
and how you might measure
Yeah.
some of those things.
So, in my opinion, one of the most critical KPIs actually, there's two critical KPIs for leaders to understand is new product vitality index. So basically, what percentage of your current revenue comes from products you
Yeah.
didn't have in your portfolio, let's say 3 or 5 years ago. Because this
Yes.
is telling you if the money that you're spending on growth, regardless if it's internal, open innovation, internal innovation, M&A, whatever, it doesn't matter. The money that you're spending to create top line growth, it's actually amounting to something. And this is where NPVI is critical.
And you're not talking about R&D spend because a lot of people would jump straight to that. Well, we're already spending money on R&D. You're saying the following. But although R&D is a spend, what's the conversion to actual cash? And
Exactly, exactly.
often companies don't know. They
Yeah,
just
yeah,
assume there's a connection between R&D spend and incremental revenue.
yeah, yeah. This is why it's very important for them to understand how many dollars of past revenue they are spending from every dollar of new revenue. So let's say
Yeah.
we've been running our core business for 100 years, and every single year we're putting $10 away from that old business towards the next gen thing.
Yeah.
Well, in 5 years from now, how much of our revenue comes from that next gen thing, and how much of the old dollars have we spent for the new dollars? So that's one, and the other critical, in my opinion, KPI is cost of failure. How much are we paying on average for every failed initiative?
That's a
And
proxy
obviously,
for learning, isn't it, in the end?
it's a proxy for learning, but it's a proxy for many other things. It's a proxy for how good your culture is.
Yeah.
It's a proxy for how good your governance is, right? If you
Yes.
have poor governance, your cost of failure is going to be massive. If you have a terrible culture where we can't speak truth to power, we're going to be pushing projects,
With
along.
no validation, just cash burners, right?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. We're just going to be pushing those projects along. And then at one point, obviously, no amount of PowerPoints internally will change the opinion of the client externally, right? I can have the best PowerPoint internally and show you how great this product is. But at the end of the day, the person that decides on how good my product is not going to be my boss, it's not going to be my boss's boss or the board of the company. It's going to be the customer that is paying for that.
Yeah, that's
And
strange.
if
That's strange, isn't it?
that's strange, right? Right? Who'd have thought? Well, right? And
Hey,
this is again something that we typically work with boards on our projects to explain and to have them understand. Also, given where society is these days, cost of failure is extremely important because it shifts mindset from
that's right.
trying to pick the winners to try to have a portfolio view and try out different things very, very fast. And through cost of failure, you can actually measure how many things you're trying out. And not just that, but make sure that the budget that you have is distributed evenly across multiple bets.
Yeah. Hey, and I've seen that as actually one of the things, this cost of failure, not just cost of failure. When you teach people the base rates for failure for this type of innovation you're talking about, it's, I mean, you can look at the statistics, it's around 90%, but somewhere between 60 and 95-ish% of these new bets fail. That by itself, once you make it obvious to people, is an unlock for psychological safety. Because
Mhm.
one of the big problems in corporate is when you place a bet, there's an assumption there's a 100% chance of success. And the only reason it wouldn't succeed is because your execution is terrible. Right? So I think this cost of failure is a great way, and educating people on the actual failure rates is a great way to unlock just a different culture of testing things because it's not your fault when it fails. Mostly it's what you said, the customer just doesn't want it, the trends aren't in your favor, etc. So speaking of trends, is we have to get to this. There's a lot of talk about AI. And if you remember not too long ago, it was IoT. And then corporates were coming out saying we're going to do a digital transformation. And now they're going to say we're doing AI. And there's a lot of hype in different directions. You're sitting in Europe where it's, I would say, a little bit more of a pessimistic direction, more of a doomerism, but you can correct me. And in the US, it's just absolute AI psychosis, right? Like every day there's a launch of something. Oh my God, this is going to destroy the whole SaaS business model. This industry is cooked. Yeah, this is very American, right? Bravado, jump to this is going to change the whole world. It's a game changer, without any proof, right? It's just, psychosis, I would say, or hype. You're deep in the trenches. Is AI a thing in corporate yet or not? Because this is hard for me to determine between what's just the hype, the talk, and what's the actual lay of the land on the ground. And then what's your actual opinion on AI? And you can say what, LLMs, vision, whatever. Will it have any impact in the short term or not? Beyond hype.
Well, I'm gonna, you know, switch on my engineer brain again and you know come up with the stats. 90% of AI projects
That's
fail
the
to return
MIT
ROI.
one, right? That's the
That's the
MIT.
MIT. That's the MIT research that came out, I think, in October last year. So it's pretty new.
And it could be worse because that's reported failures,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Exactly. It can be close to 99.999%
Yes,
of
yeah,
projects,
yes,
right?
yes.
Again, going back to conversation of cost of failure, a lot of my clients are interested in applying cost of failure, and I say, well, first and foremost, we need to define what failure means, and we need to
Yeah,
live by that. And then obviously a lot of people start pushing back. Yeah, but it was not a failure because we learned so much, and the learnings go back into better products next year or in 2 years' time. Yeah, but still, that particular initiative that we put 500,000 towards,
no ROI.
went tits up.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Which
right?
is a good thing, by the way. It's a good thing if
It's
you
a good
stop it on
thing.
time.
It's a good thing, but we have to admit our wrongdoings, and obviously, if we get learnings out of it, that's even better. Going back to AI, so there's definitely hype, and obviously, if you look now at corporate budget, everything has to go towards AI, from trainings to product implementations to everything. Like you can no longer get a training across HR if it's not branded with AI
Yeah,
training for whatever, right?
yeah.
Which makes sense, right? Which I'm not criticizing. I think it makes sense, but it's
There are good
definitely
applications for sure.
definitely again 90% of projects fail, and they fail because again we haven't addressed the critical issues. We've been talking about design thinking and lean startup and experiments and experiment driven innovation and hypothesis driven development for I would say 20 years now, right? Design
Yeah,
thinking it's been around for more than 20 years. How many of those AI projects actually start by understanding the problem
right.
and interviewing the people that have that problem?
And by the way, that's the great opportunity, I think, with AI. I think a lot of engineers, correct me, I don't want to typecast you completely. They have a deep belief in if I build the right thing, the market will be there because it's going to be so much quality and it's going to solve the problem so well. But I think we've learned also over the last 20, 30 years that that's just not true because it's dependent on getting the problem definition of the customer correct. And
Mhm.
often you do 2 years, 3 months, a year of development just to find out nobody wants this thing. And that's hard to
Yeah.
internalize. It's a difficult thing to actually have to admit, but most engineers learn it if they've done it. It's not hard to learn. Basically, you don't plan a wedding if there's no spouse on the other side, right? So the great hope for AI, I think, is it can speed up that realization. You don't
Yeah.
need to spend a year developing something. You can vibe code it, get it out the door, and at least get that early feedback much faster than you ever could have before. Are
Yeah.
you seeing
Yeah.
people employing that or not in corporate? Or are they still doing the old thing of let's make it perfect first, then test it?
I I think we're still there, unfortunately. I think the whole practice of design thinking and lean startup to some extent hasn't yet matured, or at least the people that are now in charge of AI are oblivious to what we've been writing about in the lean startup community for the past 15 years.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, the tenure of people in innovation is 4 years, so I'm not surprised that that's the case. Uh, we just have to go back to understanding basic business or basic innovation logic. Try to identify the problem, build small scale from there. Obviously, there's other issues around, data optimism. All these organizations believe that they have amazing data or a lot of data, and that data is of high quality. And then whenever they implement projects, they realize that the data is just not there. It was crappy to begin with. And obviously it's crap in, crap out. The AI is not
Yeah.
going to make
But
up data
that
out
in
of
my
thin air.
experience relates to the main thing you pointed out is if you don't craft your strategy well, then you don't know what data to even get. And the
Hmm.
belief that if you just made all data transparent, you could make better strategic decisions, I don't think that's true because it depends on having the actual strategy in place, the hypothesis for it, before you even
Yeah.
get the data to know how to interpret it. Um, Jason, take us home. I know we have another question related to Dan.
Well, we're kind of running out of time here. So, Dan, I just want to kind of open the floor for you for here a minute. Where can we find your book? Where can we find you?
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, the books are on Amazon. If you type in the corporate startup or innovation accounting or the last one, Open Innovation Works, you can find them in your local Amazon. Um, if you have issues with delivery times, don't take it up with me. We have publishers and they're in charge of that.
It's the Strait of Hormuz, man. It's the Strait
Yeah,
of
exactly.
Hormuz.
Exactly.
Your
Blame
books
it
are tied up in the Strait of Hormuz.
blame it on that. Obviously, drop me a line. We might be able to help you, get book from a different country, or I might just send you a digital copy if you ask nicely. Um, that's one, and obviously you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm posting quite frequently there. If you want to get in touch, that's the best channel. And in general, you can probably find me at conferences. I'm trying to stay away from pure innovation conferences, so you can find me at industry conferences. For
Back
example,
to the pragmatism. That's the
back to
pragmatism.
pragmatism. Yeah, I love innovation conferences. I love the innovation group, but to be honest with you, it's still a lot of theater going on, unfortunately. And now
Yeah.
with open innovation, it's even more theater and less accountability. Um, I'm going there to try to change, how things are and change the mindset. But I much rather be closer to a CFO talking about the go-to-market strategy for their new payment app or for their new drug or for their new digital therapeutic app. And use all of our innovation expertise and all of our innovation processes to solve a critical business issue.
Today and not 10 years down the road when the CVC fund returns, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly,
All right.
Very
exactly.
good. Very cool.
Good deal. Dan, thanks for joining us here today on Show Your Priors. We really appreciate it. I'll leave a link to your LinkedIn in the description of our videos. We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you back on sometime.
Thank you very much, Jason.
All right.
We hope you enjoyed the interview with Dan Toma. To be totally transparent, Dan Toma was kind enough to write the preface for my upcoming book, Fatal Abstraction, coming out in August. Little plug for myself. I'm not ashamed. But I think one of the interesting things with Dan, this is why we've always got along, Dan always goes to the heart of what's going on in the system. He always goes to the priors, the fundamentals, as Warren Buffett calls it. And that's been the through line in this episode. When you hear speculation, when you hear the threat of regulation, even when you're talking about UFOs, we dabbled into that a little bit, right? Think all the way back to your prior probabilities. Think through the entire system that you're looking at and think about how might we regulate that? How might we adapt it? How might we innovate on it? And I think that's been the through thread in this episode. And we hope you enjoyed the discussion. We're going to have many more guests on, and we're going to get much deeper into many more topics in innovation and strategy and business and beyond.
Yeah, I agree. It was a great show. Thanks for doing it with me, Mike, as always. Thank you for being here. We hope you come back next week. Bring a friend. Bring your parents. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe. Comment. We'd love to hear from you. Make a post in the community while you're at it. we'll see you next week. Appreciate it.
Mama, I think I made it. I'm kinda like Tulsa famous. I'm hanging out with Gary. Now they know what my name is. Feeling like Sir Mike, it's money in my name, bitch. Humble to perform on